The attack came on a Thursday. Grace was in Central Park with Isabella, Carlo, and James, maintaining their discreet distance while she pushed the stroller along a path dappled with late October sunlight. It had been 3 weeks since Marco showed her those surveillance photos, 3 weeks of heightened security and careful routines, and nothing had happened. Grace had started to relax, to think maybe the threat had been exaggerated. She should have known better. The man approached casually, dressed like any other park visitor in jeans and a light jacket. He stopped near a bench, pretending to check his phone, but Grace caught him glancing at Isabella. Something in her gut twisted, maternal instinct maybe, or just the paranoia that came from living in Marco's world. She started to turn the stroller around, heading back toward where Carlo and James stood near the park entrance. But the man moved faster than she expected, closing the distance in 3 long strides. "Grace Morrison?" His accent was thick, Eastern European. Russian, Grace thought with rising panic. "We need to talk about your employer." "I don't know what you're—" The man pulled back his jacket slightly, revealing a gun tucked into his waistband. Not pointing it at her, not yet, but the threat was unmistakable. "Don't make scene, just listen." Grace's hands tightened on the stroller handle. Isabella cooed innocently, completely unaware of the danger. Carlo and James were too far away, blocked by a cluster of tourists taking photos. Grace was alone with a man carrying a gun, and she had no idea what to do. "Mr. Volkov has message for Valentino," the man continued, his voice low and urgent. "Tell him Brooklyn territory is now negotiable. Tell him accidents happen to people who refuse to negotiate. Tell him," he glanced down at Isabella, "tell him everyone he loves is vulnerable." The threat was explicit now, undeniable. Grace felt rage surge through her fear, hot, protective, maternal. This man was threatening Isabella, threatening her baby. No, not her baby, but it felt like hers in that moment. "Get away from us," Grace said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "Now." The man smiled, showing gold teeth. "You have fire. I like this. But fire gets people burned, yes? Remember the message." He walked away casually, disappearing into the crowd before Carlo and James even realized something had happened. Grace stood frozen, her heart hammering, Isabella gurgling happily in the stroller, completely unaware that they'd just been threatened by a Russian mobster in broad daylight. Carlo reached her first, his hand going to his concealed weapon. "Ms. Morrison, what happened?" Grace's voice came out shaky, adrenaline making her hands tremble. "There was a man, Russian, he threatened Isabella, threatened Mr. Valentino. He had a gun." Carlo's expression went cold, professional. He spoke rapidly into a phone while James positioned himself between Grace and the crowd, his body a human shield. Within minutes, 2 more security guards appeared, forming a protective circle around Grace and Isabella. "We're taking you home," Carlo said firmly. "Now." The ride back to the penthouse was a blur. Grace held Isabella close, the baby fussing at the tight grip, but Grace unable to loosen her hold. She kept seeing that man's gold teeth, kept hearing his voice. Everyone he loves is vulnerable. "Get away from us," Grace said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "Now." The man smiled, showing gold teeth. "You have fire. I like this. But fire gets people burned, yes? Remember the message." He walked away casually, disappearing into the crowd before Carlo and James even realized something had happened. Grace stood frozen, her heart hammering, Isabella gurgling happily in the stroller, completely unaware that they'd just been threatened by a Russian mobster in broad daylight. Carlo reached her first, his hand going to his concealed weapon. "Ms. Morrison, what happened?" Grace's voice came out shaky, adrenaline making her hands tremble. "There was a man, Russian, he threatened Isabella, threatened Mr. Valentino. He had a gun." Carlo's expression went cold, professional. He spoke rapidly into a phone while James positioned himself between Grace and the crowd, his body a human shield. Within minutes, 2 more security guards appeared, forming a protective circle around Grace and Isabella. "We're taking you home," Carlo said firmly. "Now." The ride back to the penthouse was a blur. Grace held Isabella close, the baby fussing at the tight grip, but Grace unable to loosen her hold. She kept seeing that man's gold teeth, kept hearing his voice. "Everyone he loves is vulnerable." "Marco," Grace said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "Now." The man smiled, showing gold teeth. "You have fire. I like this. But fire gets people burned, yes? Remember the message." He walked away casually, disappearing into the crowd before Carlo and James even realized something had happened. Grace stood frozen, her heart hammering, Isabella gurgling happily in the stroller, completely unaware that they'd just been threatened by a Russian mobster in broad daylight. Carlo reached her first, his hand going to his concealed weapon. "Ms. Morrison, what happened?" Grace's voice came out shaky, adrenaline making her hands tremble. "There was a man, Russian. He threatened Isabella, threatened Mr. Valentino. He had a gun." Carlo's expression went cold, professional. He spoke rapidly into a phone while James positioned himself between Grace and the crowd, his body a human shield. Within minutes, 2 more security guards appeared, forming a protective circle around Grace and Isabella. "We're taking you home," Carlo said firmly. "Now." The ride back to the penthouse was a blur. Grace held Isabella close, the baby fussing at the tight grip, but Grace unable to loosen her hold. She kept seeing that man's gold teeth, kept hearing his voice. "Everyone he loves is vulnerable." Marco met them in the lobby, his expression thunderous. He took Isabella from Grace's arms without a word, checking his daughter over like he expected to find injuries. Only when he was satisfied that Isabella was unharmed did he turn to Grace. "Tell me everything." Grace recounted the encounter, her voice steadier now, but still shaking slightly. Marco's expression grew darker with each word, his jaw clenching until Grace could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. "Volkov," he said finally, the name coming out like a curse. "Marco, go upstairs, stay with Isabella. Don't leave the penthouse." His voice was hard, cold, nothing like the man who'd held his daughter at midnight or shared whiskey in the kitchen. This was the other Marco, the dangerous one, the one who built empires on blood and fear. "What are you going to do?" "What I should have done weeks ago." Marco handed Isabella back to Grace, his fingers brushing hers in the transfer. "Grace, I'm sorry. This is my fault. I should have—" "Don't." Grace cut him off, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "Don't apologize for other people's violence. Just fix it. Keep Isabella safe. Keep us safe." Marco looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Then he nodded once and turned to Vincent, who'd appeared in the lobby like a summoned ghost. "Gather everyone. We're having a conversation with the Bratva tonight." Grace spent the rest of the day in the nursery, unable to settle, jumping at every sound. Isabella sensed her anxiety and fussed more than usual, refusing to nurse properly, her little face scrunching with distress. Grace tried everything, singing, rocking, walking, changing positions, but nothing worked. Finally, exhausted and frustrated, Grace broke down crying. She sat in the rocking chair with Isabella wailing in her arms and just let the tears come, all the fear and anger and grief she'd been holding back, pouring out in great gasping sobs. "I'm sorry," she whispered to Isabella. "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm supposed to keep you safe, and I can't. Grace." She looked up to find Antonio in the doorway, his usually composed expression softened with concern. He moved into the room slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. "Let me take her for a moment," he said gently, "just for a moment." Grace handed over Isabella, too exhausted to protest. Antonio held the baby with surprising competence, swaying in that instinctive way that suggested he'd done this before. Isabella's crying softened almost immediately. "I raised 3 daughters," Antonio said, answering Grace's unspoken question. "All grown now, with children of their own, but you never forget the rhythm." He smiled down at Isabella. "She's feeling your fear, Miss Morrison. Babies are like that, emotional mirrors. You calm down, she calms down." "How am I supposed to calm down when someone just threatened to kill her?" "By trusting that Mr. Valentino will handle it. And he will. I've worked for him for 15 years. I've seen him face down worse threats than this. He always protects what matters to him." Grace wiped her eyes. "You know, don't you, about what I've been doing for Isabella?" Antonio's smile was knowing. "I've worked in this household since before Isabella was born, Miss Morrison. Very little escapes my notice."
"I know. That's why Mr. Valentino kept you. Not because you followed the rules, but because you broke them for the right reasons." Antonio handed Isabella back, the baby now calm and drowsy. "He cares about you, you know, more than he probably should, more than is wise for a man in his position." Grace's heart stuttered. "He cares about Isabella?" "Yes, and he cares about you. I see how he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching. I see how he's changed since you came here, less haunted, more present, almost like the man he was before Sophia died." Antonio moved toward the door. "Whatever happens tonight with the Russians, know that Mr. Valentino is fighting for his family, all of his family, including you." After Antonio left, Grace sat with Isabella, processing his words. Marco cared about her, not just as Isabella's caretaker, but as something more. She'd felt it in their late-night conversations, in the way he'd revealed his world to her, in the gentleness of his hand on her shoulder. But caring was dangerous in Marco's world. Caring made people vulnerable, and vulnerability got people killed. Marco didn't return until after midnight. Grace heard the door open, heard low voices in the hallway, heard the heaviness of his footsteps approaching the nursery. She was still awake, sitting in the dark with Isabella sleeping in her arms, unable to settle herself, even though the baby had finally surrendered to exhaustion. Marco appeared in the doorway, and even in the dim light, Grace could see the blood on his knuckles. Not much, just enough to notice. He saw her looking and flexed his hand, grimacing. "Is it handled?" Grace asked quietly. "It's handled. Volkov won't be a problem anymore." Marco's voice was rough, tired. "His man who approached you in the park has been dealt with. And I've made it clear to the Brodva that touching my family comes with consequences they can't afford." "What kind of consequences?" "The permanent kind." Grace should have been horrified, should have recoiled from this man who just admitted to killing someone. But all she felt was relief that the threat was gone, that Isabella was safe, that Marco had done what needed doing. "Thank you," she whispered. Marco moved into the room, his movements slow and careful, like he was afraid of disturbing the peace. He knelt beside the rocking chair, his eyes on Isabella's sleeping face. "I'm sorry, Grace. I'm sorry you got pulled into this. I'm sorry some bastard threatened you and Isabella. I'm sorry. Stop apologizing." Grace reached out with her free hand, touching Marco's bruised knuckles gently. "You protected us. That's what matters." Marco turned his hand over, his palm up, and Grace realized she was still touching him. Their fingers intertwined, slowly, inevitably. And for a moment, they just stayed like that, connected, silent, Isabella sleeping peacefully between them. "I can't lose you," Marco said finally, his voice barely audible. "I can't lose either of you. I already lost Sophia. I can't. I won't." "You won't," Grace said firmly. "We're here, we're safe, and we're staying." Marco looked up at her then, and in his eyes Grace saw everything he wasn't saying. Gratitude, fear, need, and something else. Something that looked dangerously like love, but couldn't be, shouldn't be. Complicated everything. But Grace didn't pull her hand away, didn't break eye contact, didn't retreat from the intensity of the moment. Because Antonio was right. They were family now. All of them. And family meant staying, even when things got dangerous. Even when the smart choice would be to run. Family meant choosing each other, over and over again, no matter the cost.
Winter came to Manhattan with a vengeance, turning the city into a postcard of itself. Beautiful, cold, and slightly treacherous. Grace watched snow fall past her window while Isabella nursed, the baby now 5 months old and thriving in ways that felt miraculous given how she'd started life. 2 months had passed since the incident in the park. 2 months of heightened security and careful routines, and Marco treating Grace less like an employee and more like something he couldn't quite name. They existed in a strange limbo, more than professional, not quite personal, dancing around feelings neither seemed ready to acknowledge. Grace's phone rang, shattering the peaceful moment. Janelle's name flashed on the screen. Grace had been avoiding her sister's calls for weeks, unable to explain her life without revealing too much. She answered reluctantly. "Hey, Nell." "Don't hey Nell me. Where the hell have you been? Mom is losing her mind. You missed Thanksgiving, you're about to miss Christmas, and you won't tell us what's going on." Janelle's voice was sharp with worry and frustration. "Gracie, we're family. You can't just disappear." "I'm not disappearing. I'm just busy." "Busy with what? This mysterious job you won't talk about? This place you're living that you won't let us visit?" Janelle's tone softened. "Baby girl, I'm worried about you. We all are. Ever since Maya died, you've been gone. Like you're here, but not really here." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm trying to survive, Nell. That's all I can manage right now." "By isolating yourself? By cutting off everyone who loves you?" Janelle sighed heavily. "Look, I get it. It's impossible. But you can't do this alone. You need family. You need people who knew Maya, who knew you before everything fell apart." "I have people." The words came out defensive, sharper than Grace intended. "Who? Your employer? Grace, that's not the same as... You don't understand." Grace stood, pacing with Isabella still in her arms. "This job, this place, it's the first thing that's felt right since Maya died. I'm needed here. I matter here. And yes, maybe it's not conventional, and maybe I should be back in Atlanta with family, but I can't. I can't go back to being the girl whose baby died. I can't be the tragedy everyone tiptoes around." Janelle was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was gentle. "Is that what you think? That you're just a tragedy to us? Aren't I?" "No. You're Grace. You're my sister. Your mom's daughter. You're the woman who used to sing off-key in the shower and make terrible puns and dream about traveling the world." Janelle's voice cracked. "Maya's death didn't erase who you were, Gracie. It broke you for a while. But you're still in there. And we miss you. The real you." Grace pressed her face against Isabella's head, breathing in that baby smell that was somehow both sweet and sour. "I don't know if that person exists anymore." "Then come home and find out. Just for Christmas. A few days. Let Mom feed you too much food, and let Dad pretend he's not crying every time he looks at you, and let me be your annoying big sister. Let us love you, Gracie. Please." Grace wanted to say yes, wanted to go home to Atlanta, to be surrounded by people who'd known her before grief rewired her brain. But the thought of leaving Isabella, even for a few days, made her chest tighten with panic. And the thought of leaving Marco? No, she couldn't think about that. Marco was her employer, nothing more. Except he wasn't, and they both knew it. "I'll think about it," Grace said finally. "I promise I'll think about it. That's all I'm asking." Janelle paused. "Gracie, whoever these people are that you're working for, they're treating you well, right? You're safe?" Grace thought about the Russian mobster in the park, about Marco's bloodied knuckles, about living in a penthouse surrounded by armed security. "Yes," she lied, "I'm safe." After hanging up, Grace sat with Isabella, feeling the weight of everything she wasn't saying to her family. How could she explain that she was nursing a mafia boss's daughter, that she'd become essential to a dangerous man's household, that somewhere along the way she'd stopped mourning Maya and started living again, but only in this strange, borrowed life that belonged to someone else's tragedy? "What do you think, sweet girl?" Grace whispered to Isabella. "Should I go see my family, leave you for a few days?" Isabella cooed, her tiny hand reaching for Grace's face. Grace caught the hand, kissing the small fingers, feeling her heart twist with affection that was definitely not professional anymore. She'd fallen in love with this baby. Somewhere between the midnight feedings and the lullabies and watching Isabella grow healthy and strong, Grace had forgotten this wasn't her daughter, had forgotten the boundaries that were supposed to exist between nanny and child. And Marco, God, Marco, she'd fallen for him too, hadn't she? Fallen for his vulnerability beneath the violence, for the way he looked at Isabella like she was his entire world, for the quiet moments when he forgot to be the dangerous Don and was just a grieving father trying his best. It was a disaster, a complete, unavoidable disaster. A knock on the door interrupted her spiral. Marco entered without waiting for permission, his presence filling the room in that way he had, commanding, intense, impossible to ignore. "We need to talk," he said. Grace's stomach dropped. Those 4 words never preceded anything good. About what? About Christmas. About you taking time off to see your family. Grace stared at him in shock. "How did you—" "The penthouse isn't bugged, but phones are easy to monitor. I heard your sister's call." Marco held up a hand before Grace could protest the invasion of privacy. "I wasn't spying. Security protocols require monitoring all communications from the building. But I heard. And she's right, Grace. You should go home. See your family." "I can't leave Isabella." "Yes, you can. For a few days. We'll manage."
"You don't understand. Grace stopped, unable to articulate the panic rising in her throat. Leaving Isabella felt impossible, like abandoning Maya all over again, like betraying this second chance at motherhood she'd been given. Marco moved closer, sitting on the ottoman near the rocking chair. "Grace, I'm not firing you. I'm not asking you to leave permanently. I'm telling you to take a break, see your family. Remember who you were before you came here. What if I don't want to remember? What if this—" Grace gestured around the nursery, at Isabella, at Marco. "What if this is enough? What if I don't want to be that person anymore? You can't hide forever. Watch me." Marco laughed, but it was sad, understanding. "Grace, I recognize what you're doing because I'm doing it too. We're both using Isabella as an excuse not to grieve properly, not to face what we've lost. But we can't. We can't heal if we don't let ourselves feel it. I don't want to heal. Healing means moving on, and moving on means forgetting Maya." Grace's voice broke. "If I stop hurting, doesn't that mean she didn't matter? Doesn't that mean I'm a terrible mother who forgot her own daughter?" "No." Marco's voice was firm, certain in a way Grace's hadn't been in months. "It means you loved her enough to survive losing her. It means you're strong enough to keep living, even though part of you died with her. And Grace," he reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and wiped a tear from her cheek. "Maya would want you to live, really live, not just survive." The gentleness in his touch undid her completely. Grace started crying in earnest now, deep sobs that shook her whole body. Marco took Isabella carefully, setting her in the crib, then pulled Grace to her feet and into his arms. It was the first time they'd embraced, the first time they'd crossed that final physical boundary. And Grace melted into it, into the solidity of his chest and the strength of his arms, and the way he held her like she was precious, like she mattered, like she was more than just the woman caring for his daughter. "I'm sorry," she gasped between sobs. "I'm sorry, I'm a mess, I shouldn't." "Stop apologizing. Just let me hold you." Marco's voice was rough against her hair. "You hold Isabella every day. You hold me together without even knowing it. Let someone hold you for once." They stood like that for a long time, Grace crying into Marco's chest, while he murmured things in Italian she didn't understand, but that sounded like comfort, like safety, like promises neither of them was ready to make in English. Finally, Grace pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes. "I look terrible. You look beautiful." The words hung between them, too honest, too revealing. Grace saw the moment Marco realized what he'd said, saw him consider taking it back, saw him decide not to. "Marco, I know all the reasons this is a bad idea. You work for me, you're grieving, my world is dangerous, we're both disasters held together by duct tape and desperation." Marco cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gentle on her cheeks. "But Grace, I care about you, more than I should, more than is smart, and I think you care about me too." Grace should deny it, should step back, re-establish boundaries, remember that she was the nanny and nothing more. But she was so tired of lying, so tired of pretending that the way she felt about Marco was purely professional. "I do," she whispered. "I care about you, about both of you. So much it terrifies me." "Good. Be terrified too." Marco smiled slightly. "But be terrified here, with me, with Isabella. Be terrified in this disaster of a life we're building together." "What are we building exactly?" "I have no idea, but it feels like something worth fighting for." Grace thought about Janelle's call, about her family waiting in Atlanta, about the life she'd left behind when Maya died. She thought about grief and healing and what it meant to move forward without forgetting. She thought about this man who'd let her into his world, who trusted her with his daughter, who was looking at her like she was the answer to questions he hadn't known how to ask. "Kiss me," she said suddenly, surprising herself with her boldness. "Before I overthink this and talk myself out of it, just kiss me." Marco didn't hesitate. He pulled her close and kissed her like he'd been waiting months for permission, like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning. Grace kissed him back with equal desperation, her hands fisting in his shirt, tasting salt from her tears and something else. Hope, maybe, or just the electric possibility of starting over. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marco rested his forehead against hers. "Go to Atlanta," he said quietly. "See your family. Take a week. But Grace, come back. Please, come back." "I will, I promise." Grace kissed him again, softer this time. "But when I come back, we need to figure out what this is, what we're doing." "Fair enough." Grace pulled away reluctantly, already missing the warmth of his body against hers. "I should book a flight." "Already done. You leave tomorrow morning, first class, car service to the airport." At Grace's surprised expression, Marco shrugged. "I told you, I heard your sister's call. Figured you'd need a push." "You're very presumptuous, Mr. Valentino." "It's part of my charm," Marco smiled. And Grace realized it was the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since Sophia died. "Go pack. Spend time with your family. Let them love you. And Grace, tell them about Maya. Really tell them. Let them help you grieve." After Marco left, Grace stood alone in the nursery, her lips still tingling from his kiss, her heart racing with equal parts terror and exhilaration. She'd just kissed her employer, had admitted feelings that complicated everything, had agreed to leave the baby she'd come to think of as hers, even though every instinct screamed to stay. But Marco was right. She needed to face her family, needed to remember who Grace Morrison was before she became Isabella's wet nurse, before she fell for a dangerous man, before she started building a life in someone else's tragedy. She just hoped that person, that old Grace, was still someone worth being. And she hoped desperately that when she came back, Marco and Isabella would still be here, still need her, still want her in whatever strange, beautiful disaster they were building together.
Atlanta smelled like home. Magnolias and red clay, and her mother's peach cobbler cooling on the kitchen counter. Grace stood on her parents' front porch, her suitcase at her feet, her hand raised to knock, and felt like she was 15 again, nervous about coming home after breaking curfew. Except she was 28, and she'd broken something far more significant than curfew. She'd broken herself, and she was only now starting to understand how to put the pieces back together. The door flew open before she could knock. Her mother, Diane Morrison, 62 years old and still beautiful despite the silver threading through her hair, stood there with tears already streaming down her face. "Grace Elizabeth Morrison, get in this house right now!" Grace barely had time to grab her suitcase before her mother pulled her inside, wrapping her in a hug that smelled like vanilla and safety and everything Grace hadn't realized she'd been missing. She started crying immediately, all the emotion she'd been holding back pouring out in her mother's kitchen. "I'm sorry," Grace gasped. "I'm so sorry, Mama. I should have called more, should have visited, should have—" "Hush now." Diane pulled back, cupping Grace's face in her hands. "You're here now. That's what matters. Come on, your daddy's in the den pretending he's not about to cry, and Janelle's upstairs with the kids. We're having a proper family dinner tonight, and you're going to eat until you can't move." Grace let herself be pulled into the warmth of her childhood home, let herself be surrounded by family photos and familiar furniture, and the chaos of her sister's 3 children running through the house. It felt surreal after months in Marco's pristine penthouse, after the quiet intensity of caring for Isabella, after the careful dance she and Marco had been doing around their feelings. Her father, Thomas Morrison, retired postal worker and the gentlest man Grace had ever known, looked up from his newspaper when she entered the den. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then he set down the paper and opened his arms, and Grace fell into them like she was 5 years old and he was still the person who could fix everything. "My baby girl," he murmured against her hair. "We missed you so much." "I missed you too, Daddy." Janelle appeared in the doorway with her youngest on her hip, 3-year-old Marcus, who Grace hadn't seen since he was barely walking. "Well, well, the prodigal daughter returns." Grace laughed through her tears. "Don't start with me, Nell. Who wouldn't dream of it?" Janelle passed Marcus to their mother and pulled Grace into a fierce hug. "But we're talking later. Real talking. No more avoiding. Deal?" Dinner was chaos in the best way. Janelle's husband Gerald telling terrible jokes, the kids arguing over who got the last biscuit, her mother piling Grace's plate with enough food to feed 3 people. Grace ate mechanically, tasting nothing, her mind half in Atlanta and half in Manhattan, where Isabella was probably crying for her evening feeding, and Marco was probably wondering if she'd actually come back. "So," Janelle said, fixing Grace with the look that meant interrogation time, "tell us about this mysterious job. You're working for a family in Manhattan?" Grace nodded, choosing her words carefully. "A single father. His wife died in a car accident. He has a baby, Isabella. She's 5 months old now." "And you're the nanny?" her mother asked. "Yes, live in. It's been good for me. Taking care of Isabella, having a purpose again." Thomas set down his fork. "This man treating you right? Paying you fair?" "More than fair. Grace stopped, unsure how to describe Marco without revealing too much. "He's a good father. He's grieving too, trying to figure out how to raise his daughter alone. We've become friends, I guess." Janelle's eyebrow arched. "Just friends?" Grace felt heat creep up her neck. "Nell, because you've got that look. That I'm thinking about someone look. And you're blushing, which you only do when—" "Can we not do this at the dinner table in front of the children?" Grace interrupted, mortified. Her mother laughed. "Leave your sister alone, Janelle. If Grace has met someone, she'll tell us when she's ready." "I haven't. It's complicated. He's my employer, and we're both grieving, and his world is—" Grace stopped, realizing she was revealing more than she'd intended. "It doesn't matter. I'm just the nanny." "Baby girl, you never were good at lying." Thomas smiled gently. "If this man makes you happy, if being there with his daughter helps you heal, then that's enough for me. Just promise me he's treating you with respect, that you're safe." Grace thought about the Russian mobster in the park, about Marco's bloodied knuckles, about living surrounded by armed security. She thought about the kiss in the nursery, about Marco calling her beautiful, about the way he looked at her like she was something precious. "I'm safe," she said, and meant it. "I promise." Later that night, Grace sat on the back porch with Janelle, wrapped in blankets against the December cold, watching stars appear in the Atlanta sky. Inside, their parents had put the grandkids to bed and cleaning up dinner, giving the sisters space to talk. "Tell me about her," Janelle said quietly. "About Maya. Really tell me. You never have." Grace had been avoiding this conversation for 8 months, had shut down every attempt her family made to discuss Maya, to help her grieve properly. But sitting here in the darkness with her sister, she found the words finally coming. She was perfect. Tiny, only 2 pounds 3 ounces, but perfect. She had your nose, Nell, and the Morrison chin. She opened her eyes once, just for a second, and looked right at me. Grace's voice broke. I told her I loved her. I told her I was sorry she couldn't stay. And then, she was gone. Janelle grabbed Grace's hand, squeezing hard. "I'm so sorry, Gracie." "Everyone's sorry. But sorry doesn't fix anything. It doesn't bring her back. It doesn't make the milk stop coming, or make my body understand that there's no baby to feed anymore." "Oh, Gracie," Janelle pulled her into a sideways hug. "You're not being punished. You didn't do anything wrong. Maya's death wasn't your fault. My body couldn't keep her alive. Your body fought for her, but sometimes babies don't make it, no matter how hard we fight. That's not failure, honey. It's just the cruelest thing in the world." They sat in silence for a while, Grace crying quietly while Janelle held her, until finally, Grace asked the question that had been haunting her for months. "Does it make me a terrible mother? That I love Isabella? That sometimes I forget she's not mine?" "No." Janelle's voice was firm. "It makes you human. It makes you someone who survived something unsurvivable and found a way to keep loving anyway. Maya would be proud of you, Gracie. I know she would." "How can you know that?" "Because if I'd only had 3 hours with my daughter, I'd want to know that she mattered enough, that her mother kept living, kept loving, kept finding ways to be the person I raised her to be." Janelle squeezed Grace's hand. "You didn't forget Maya by loving Isabella. You honored her by not letting grief destroy you completely." Grace thought about Marco saying something similar, about how surviving Maya's death with enough of herself intact to love Isabella was its own kind of strength. Maybe they were right. Maybe healing didn't mean forgetting. Maybe it just meant learning to carry the loss while still moving forward. "Tell me about him," Janelle said, "this father you're working for." "His name is Marco. He's—" Grace paused, trying to find words that were honest without being complete. "He's complicated, powerful, dangerous in ways I don't fully understand. But with Isabella, he's just a dad trying his best. And he's been kind to me, patient with my grief, understanding in ways I didn't expect." "And you love him?" It wasn't a question. Grace considered denying it, but what was the point? "Yes, I love him. I love both of them," which is insane because I've only known them for 3 months and I'm supposed to be their employee and his world is nothing like mine and— "Grace," Janelle cut off her spiral, "does he love you back?" Grace thought about the kiss, about Marco's hands cradling her face, about the way he'd looked at her like she was the answer to questions he hadn't known how to ask. "I think so. Maybe. We're figuring it out." "Then figure it out. Life's too short for maybes, Gracie. You, of all people, know that."
Grace spent 3 more days in Atlanta, letting her family love her, telling them about Maya, beginning the long process of grieving properly instead of just surviving. She visited Maya's grave for the first time since the funeral, sat in the cold grass, and talked to her daughter about Isabella, about Marco, about learning to live again. "I'll never forget you," Grace whispered, tracing her finger over Maya's name on the small headstone. "But I think I'm ready to stop dying with you. I think I'm ready to try living again." On her last night, her mother pulled her aside in the kitchen. "This man, Marco, he treats you well?" "He does, Mama." "And his daughter? You love her?" "Like she's my own." Diane studied Grace's face for a long moment, then nodded. "Then go back to them. Build whatever life you're building. But Grace, don't lose yourself completely. Remember you're a Morrison. We don't break, baby girl. We bend, we survive, and we come back stronger. I'll remember. And bring them home sometime. Let us meet this man and this baby who've given you a reason to keep living. Let us love them too." Grace thought about Marco meeting her family, about Isabella playing with her cousins, about bridging the gap between her old life and her new one. It seemed impossible, Marco's dangerous world colliding with her family's gentle one. But maybe impossible things happened every day. Maybe that's what love was, making the impossible somehow work. The flight back to New York felt both too long and too short. Grace spent it thinking about everything that had changed in 3 months. About the woman she'd been when she'd first walked into Marco's penthouse, and the woman she was becoming now. She thought about Maya, about the daughter she'd lost, and the way that loss had broken her open. She thought about Isabella, about the baby who'd somehow become hers in all the ways that mattered. And she thought about Marco, complicated, dangerous, tender Marco, who'd let her into his grief and trusted her with his daughter and kissed her like she was something precious. When the car service dropped her at the building, Carlo and James were waiting to escort her upstairs. They greeted her with professional nods, but Grace caught Carlo's slight smile. "He missed you," Carlo said quietly. Both of them did. Grace's heart raced as the elevator climbed. What if things had changed while she was gone? What if Marco had reconsidered, had remembered all the reasons why this, whatever this was, couldn't work? What if Isabella had forgotten her? The penthouse door opened before she could knock. Marco stood there, and Grace saw immediately that he hadn't slept much while she was gone. There were shadows under his eyes, his hair was messier than usual, and he looked relieved, profoundly, visibly relieved. "You came back. I promised I would. People break promises. I don't." Grace stepped into the penthouse, close enough to touch him. "Where's Isabella?" "Sleeping, finally. She's been fussy without you." "Marco, I've been fussy without you." "Marco, I love you." The words came out rushed, like he'd been holding them back and couldn't anymore. "But Grace, I love you. I've loved you since you told me I wasn't weak for accepting help. I've loved you since you chose to stay even when my world got dangerous. I've loved you since I don't even know when. Maybe since that first night when I found you nursing Isabella and you looked at me like I was the one who needed saving." Grace felt tears spilling over. "I love you too. God help me, I love you too." Marco pulled her close, kissing her with desperate relief, with promises neither of them had the words for yet. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers.
"What do we do now?" he asked. "We figure it out. Together." Grace smiled through her tears. "We build something good out of all this loss. We raise Isabella. We try to be happy, even though it feels impossible." "Just happy? That's all you want?" "It's more than I thought I'd ever have again." A soft cry came from the nursery, Isabella waking up. Marco and Grace looked at each other, and Grace saw her own emotions reflected in his eyes. Love, hope, terror, determination. They walked to the nursery together, and when Grace lifted Isabella from the crib, the baby's face lit up with recognition. She reached for Grace immediately, making happy sounds, and Grace felt something settle in her chest, something that felt like peace, or at least the possibility of it. "Hey, sweet girl," Grace whispered, kissing Isabella's head. "I missed you so much." Marco wrapped his arms around both of them, and they stood there in the nursery, 3 people, bound by loss and love, and the stubborn refusal to let tragedy have the final word. Outside, Manhattan sparkled in the winter darkness. Inside, a family was being born from grief and need, and the kind of love that saves lives. It wasn't the family any of them had planned. It wasn't conventional or simple or safe, but it was theirs. And that was enough. Grace looked at Marco over Isabella's head and saw her future written in his eyes. Complicated, dangerous, full of challenges they'd have to face together. But also full of love, of second chances, of the possibility that broken people could build something beautiful if they were brave enough to try. "What are you thinking?" Marco asked softly. Grace smiled, holding Isabella closer. "I'm thinking Maya would approve. I'm thinking Sophia would too. And I'm thinking we're going to be okay. All of us." "Yeah?" "Yeah." Grace reached up with her free hand, cupping Marco's face. "We're going to be more than okay. We're going to be happy, starting right now." Marco kissed her again, gentle this time, full of promise. Isabella cooed between them, completely oblivious to the miracle she'd created, bringing together 2 shattered people and somehow making them whole. Outside, the city never slept. But inside the penthouse, inside the bubble they'd built from loss and love and stubborn hope, a new family was learning what it meant to heal, learning what it meant to choose life even after death had tried to claim them, learning what it meant to love not despite the pain, but because of it, because they'd both walked through hell and somehow found each other on the other side. It was messy. It was unconventional. It was absolutely, undeniably real. And for 3 people who'd lost everything, real was more than enough. Real was everything. 6 months later, Grace stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the simple white dress she'd chosen for today. Nothing fancy. She'd refused Marco's offers of designer gowns and elaborate ceremonies. This wasn't about showing off wealth or making statements. This was about family. Behind her, Janelle fussed with Grace's hair, pinning wildflowers into the simple updo they'd created. "You look beautiful, Gracie." "I look terrified." "Same thing," Janelle smiled. "But you're sure about this? About him? About all of it?" Grace thought about the past 6 months, about watching Isabella grow, about falling deeper in love with Marco every day, about learning to navigate his dangerous world while maintaining her own identity. She thought about family dinners where Carlo and James stood guard while her parents visited, about teaching Isabella to laugh, about Marco surprising her with a trip to Atlanta for her birthday. She thought about the night Marco had proposed, nothing fancy, just the 2 of them in the nursery after putting Isabella down, him getting down on one knee with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother and asking if she'd build this impossible life with him permanently. "I'm sure," Grace said firmly. "I've never been more sure of anything." A knock on the door, and Marco's voice. "Can I come in? I know it's bad luck, but—" "Come in," Grace called, laughing. Marco entered, looking devastating in a simple black suit, holding Isabella, who was dressed in the tiny white dress Diane had sewn for her. He stopped when he saw Grace, his expression transforming into something that took her breath away. "You're beautiful," he said hoarsely. "Grace, you're—" "Stop before you make me cry and ruin my makeup." Grace crossed to him, taking Isabella. "Is everyone here? Your family, my family, our family. Antonio's probably crying already, and Vincent's pretending he's not emotional about his boss getting married." Marco cupped her face. "Last chance to run." "Not a chance, Valentino." Grace kissed him softly. "You're stuck with me now." Best sentence I've ever heard. They walked downstairs together, Isabella between them, ready to make official what had already been true for months, that they were a family, bound not by blood or convention, but by love that had survived grief and danger and every reason they shouldn't work. As Grace saw her parents and Janelle sitting next to Antonio and Vincent, as she felt Marco's hand solid in hers and Isabella's weight against her shoulder, she thought about Maya, thought about the daughter she'd lost, and how that loss had led her here, to this moment, to this family. Thank you, she thought, sending the words out like a prayer. Thank you for teaching me to love, even though we only had 3 hours. Thank you for making me into the kind of person who could save Isabella. Thank you for everything. The ceremony was simple, intimate, perfect. And when Marco kissed her as his wife, when Isabella clapped her chubby hands and everyone cheered, Grace felt something she hadn't felt since Maya died. Complete. Not because the pain was gone, it would never be gone, but because she'd learned to carry it while still choosing joy, still choosing love, still choosing to build a life worth living. Marco had been right that first night in the nursery. Sometimes the strongest thing you could do was accept help. Sometimes surviving meant letting yourself be vulnerable. Sometimes family was something you built from broken pieces, and it was more beautiful for being imperfect. As Grace danced with her husband while their daughter watched from her grandmother's arms, as she saw 2 families, hers and Marco's, merged into something new, she thought about the title people might give their story if they ever told it. They'd leave off what happened next. They'd never know about the love that grew from that moment, about the family forged from grief and necessity and choice. They'd never know that the shocking thing wasn't what Marco did when he found Grace nursing Isabella. The shocking thing was what they all did after. How they chose each other, how they built something beautiful from loss, how they proved that love could grow in the most unlikely places if you were brave enough to try. And they were brave, all of them. Even when it was terrifying, especially then. Because that's what family did. They chose each other, over and over, no matter how complicated, or dangerous, or unlikely. They chose love. And love, Grace had learned, was always worth choosing. Sometimes the families we choose are stronger than the ones we're born into. Sometimes love finds us in the most unexpected places. And sometimes the most shocking thing isn't the scandal, it's the grace we find in surviving it together.